Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast.
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Liz Lyster. She's an OBGYN, MD, expert in perimenopause and menopause. So we're going to talk about that. Obviously, I have no personal experience with it, but I know it's a big topic that affects half the world's population. Welcome, Dr. Lyster.
Absolutely.
Lyster.
Thank you for having me. You bet.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background, how you got into this area of care.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit interesting because as I was listening to you, I was thinking, yep, I have definitely a big personal stake in this topic, in addition to the fact that I really enjoy it and I love working with women and helping them through this phase and transition of life. Because I went into menopause really young. I was only 43. That's quite young for that process to happen. And I had no idea what to expect because my mom had a hysterectomy and ovaries removed in her 30s, which is luckily super unusual now, but it was not as unusual back at that point. So I really had no idea what to expect in that way. My mom's a retired pediatrician. My dad is a retired neurologist. They're both in their 80s. They're both still they're doing great. And so I had that medical background. It was not completely a given for me to go to medical school, though. They didn't pressure me or anything, but I always enjoyed it. I liked the environment. You know, some people don't like it in hospitals. I was always happy and comfortable and found it really interesting and cool to be there.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was in college and I actually volunteered at the clinic, and what I really enjoy the very most always has been the educational part, is teaching my patients new things, new perspectives, new information, help them be comfortable with themselves and have them optimize their health. That's always been really, turns out, looking back, that's always been my passion. At one point, I was going to be a nurse practitioner, and my mom encouraged me. She's like, oh, you could just go be a doctor. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go do that.
So were you involved in menopause, perimenopause, or was it until that happened to you, then you're like, oh, I need to start addressing this with patients?
Yeah, no, it was actually before. It was when I was a medical student. In medical school, you rotate through the different specialties to try to have an idea of what resonates, what you enjoy. And I was on my OBGYN rotation, and I followed the chief resident into a patient room. And you're the student, you just kind of stand in the corner and be quiet and listen and observe. And what happened was that this was a woman having menopausal symptoms. And I don't remember exactly what we did for her. Did the doctor write a prescription? I don't recall that. What I recall is how much better that woman felt after just being listened to, just having the conversation. It was really profound experience for me, very influential. I also enjoyed surgery. And for me, OBGYN was the best of both worlds. So I got to combine all of my interests into that specialty. And then it just increased. I was already writing my first book, which is about perimenopause, when I was 43. And I thought, hey, I should check my levels. And since I'm writing about this, and they showed that I was in menopause. So that was...
Yeah, how does that work? What are some of the symptoms that a woman will have that tell her she's either entering perimenopause or in it, or menopause itself?
Yeah. This is an extremely important question because a lot of women will have these symptoms and not really realize that it has a hormonal component. And unfortunately, sometimes the doctors won't even realize. So it can be very generalized, nebulous kinds of symptoms like fatigue, irritability. It can be some of the more clear-cut ones that people know about, like the hot flashes and night sweats, like in Menopause, the musical, they do lots of fun dancing numbers about those more common ones. But it can be more general. It can be weight gain despite the same eating, the same exercise. That's another one. Sleep disruption is quite common. Decrease in libido, which is not only about sex, it's motivation and drive. So a lot of those, those are kind of the major ones. But there really can be dryness, but women can have dry eyes. There's really quite a long list of symptoms that can happen. Perimenopause can be 10 or more years before actually going into menopause. So the definition of menopause is 12 months without the period, or of course, if she has a hysterectomy, then she's put into surgical menopause if her ovaries are removed. So perimenopause.
So perimenopause is before menopause.
Correct. Exactly. Like perimeter, kind of like around the time. So women and doctors know about the 1 to 2 years where things really act up. The period gets very irregular. It starts to get less frequent. That is the transition into menopause. But perimenopause can be for, as I was saying, 10 or more years before a woman actually goes into menopause.
So if a woman suspects that she's approaching menopause or perimenopause, what kind of testing could she request and from what kind of doctor?
Right. Well, at this point, a lot of women treat their OBGYN as their primary doctor. That's very common. And that's usually, so first of all, you ask the question about symptoms, and that's really important because you have to suspect that it could be related to that to ask for the right tests. Right. And so there are some basic blood tests that can be done. I personally start with a pretty thorough, comprehensive panel of blood work. I like to check a lot of things, basic organ function tests, as well as all the female hormones, estrogen, progesterone. There's also testosterone in women. There's thyroid hormones, adrenal hormones, vitamin levels. I really start with a very thorough lab work. But the number one test that can give an indication, it's not the be-all, end-all, but it can give a reasonably good indication of where a woman is at, and that's the FSH test. Stands for follicle stimulating hormone, which starts to fluctuate as perimenopause, menopause is approaching.
Actually, what time in a woman's cycle is it better to get tested? Are there times that will mask what's really going on?
That's also a very good question. Since you have not been through this experience yourself, you're asking just very good questions for people to get from listening to us what to ask your doctor for. So that's exactly correct. In a 28-day, which is the typical menstrual cycle, the day that, so if a woman's still having her period, the one day to really check where things are at related to perimenopause and menopause is day 3. Day 1 is the first day of the period. So about a couple days after the period starts, that's day 3 of the cycle. And that's where we want to see in a woman who is not approaching menopause, the FSH will be very low. But as the ovarian function starts to decline, her ovaries are starting to consider retirement or heading into retirement, the follicle stimulating hormone goes up. The brain detects the lower function of the ovaries and tries to kind of crack a whip, if you will, and they release more, the brain releases more FSH, more follicle stimulating hormone, trying to get those ovaries to function.
Okay. And then shortly after that, will there be a big drop off after a certain period of time where it gives up, or does that feedback mechanism keep working and then eventually things change dramatically?
It does keep working. So when a woman completely goes into menopause, the FSH goes up and stays up.
Okay, that makes sense. All right.
Yeah, exactly. So the pituitary continues to detect there's no more circulating estrogen. Now, if a woman chooses to use hormone replenishment therapy, which is what I like to use as the initials HRT, others use hormone replacement therapy. But when a woman uses HRT and then she's introducing or reintroducing some estrogen into her system, then the FSH will respond and will come back down.
Does the high FSH have any physiological effects? Does it cause any symptoms itself?
There is quite a bit of data that indicate that it's not good to have higher FSH levels. Now, I'm not totally convinced about that. I really think that it's the lack of estrogen that's causing the health problems, not the FSH itself, although quite a few studies have been done looking at higher FSH and different health outcomes.
Are the symptoms, if someone's in perimenopause, different from menopause? Or is it just more of an intensification of the same ones?
It begins usually as an intensification of the same symptoms, right? It's very individual. Some women, the first thing that'll happen is their sleep will go completely sideways. Other women will notice the irritability. Other women will have sexual issues, challenges. The hot flashes and night sweats they usually tend to intensify, not for all women, but for a lot of women. And if she does not use any hormone replenishment, it'll eventually taper off. Those symptoms will taper off in at least half of women. It's also estimated that half of women will continue, even if it gets better, they have fewer hot flashes or night sweats. About half of women will continue having at least some degree of disruptive symptoms.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
So HRT, it seems like, is a little bit controversial. I guess some doctors or studies say yes, some say no. What have you observed with it? Is it safe? And how is it done safely versus not safely, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start with how to do it safely, and we'll back up and talk about the dark shadow of one particular large study that was done over 20 years ago that has had people really be afraid and concerned about its safety. So the safe ways to use to replenish hormones for estrogen means that we need to use estrogen through the skin. So that can be topical gels, it can be patches, it can be hormone pellets that are put into the sub-Q tissue in an office procedure every few months. Patches are once or twice a week. The gels are daily. As long as we go through the skin, we're not doing the oral estrogen, which we can include the birth control pill in oral estrogen. That stimulates the liver to produce clotting factors. So the cardiovascular issues that some have associated with HRT were entirely from the fact that the estrogen was given orally. So that was some of the heart health challenges that happened with that. So estrogen through the skin is number one. Number two, that we've also learned in the last couple of decades, is the progesterone needs to actually be progesterone. And the word we like to use is bioidentical. Bioidentical, a lot of doctors kind of bristle a little bit at the use of that word, but all I mean when I use it is structure of the molecule is the same as what the ovaries used to make plenty of. Now they're not making as much and we don't get the benefits. And so the large Women's Health Initiative study from 2002, 2003, that's the study that showed a trend, it did not reach statistical significance, but it showed a trend in the women who were they were given an oral estrogen, that's not good, and they were given a non-bioidentical progestin. They started to have, it exhibited more trend towards more cases of breast cancer. So they stopped that study, right? And there was a whole nother arm of the study in women who were only given estrogen. They weren't given the progestin. That arm of the study continued for 2 more years. And it showed the women getting estrogen had a lower incidence of breast cancer, which you can imagine at that point, it just barely made the news. At that point, because the oral estrogen had other problems, but we really, the wrong women were studied. They were all women who were well into menopause when inflammation already sets in due to the lack of the hormones. And so we now look back at that study and we just see so much wrong with it. And it's really unfortunate. They keep producing papers from this study, from this group of women
I was taking on like a life of its own. You can't get rid of it.
Correct. And we've got this whole generation of doctors trained, over 20 years. That's a long time to be operating under incorrect information. The North American Menopause Society they're catching up. They issue a position statement every 5 years. The last one was in 2022. And they said a lot of good things that people like me who've already been specializing in menopause for a really long time, we already knew these things, but at least they're getting the word out to more mainstream doctors that, for example, there really isn't a cutoff age at which, like if you have not started HRT, you're out of luck. That was one of the original conclusions after that big study. That's not true. My oldest patient right now is in her 80s. She just got married a couple of years ago. She wants to really feel good, so she loves her HRT. So
What if a woman has had like incredibly low levels or no estrogen for years, and then all of a sudden she starts taking the hormone replenishment? Is there a jarring event that happens in the beginning as she gets used to it again, or what happens?
Well, I like to take a start low, go slow approach for that very reason. You're absolutely right. So some women, I have several women like this in my practice where they did the transition into menopause pretty smoothly. They felt okay. They didn't really feel big disruptions in their life and their sleep. And so they did not feel prompted to go to their doctor and say, you have to help me. Please give me something. Give me the hormones or some type of help. And then about 5-10 years into things, it becomes like a perfect storm. All of a sudden she can't sleep. All of a sudden her motivation, the bottom just drops out, and she's still only 60. She's not retired from work yet. A lot of my women in my practice. Okay. So that is, it's very individual. And with everybody, no matter what, I still like to start low and just dial things up slowly. My goal, which I contrast with like a full, I'm definitely in the anti-aging world in terms of medicine, the more preventive approach to medicine and medical care. But I'm not trying to get people to have the levels of a 20-year-old.
Okay.
I just want her to feel good. What are her goals? Yeah.
So anecdotally, what do patients say as they start to get, the hormone replenishment? What happens like in the first week? Then after that, what does it settle into?
Yeah, great. So there's what I call the hormone time frame. The hormone time frame is about 8 to 10 weeks until the body and the cells in her body, and men too. Men are about 10% of my practice. I love taking care of men because things are more straightforward. There are fewer moving parts in terms of all the hormones that we want to improve, improving testosterone. So we've got to give the cells those 8 to 10 weeks to really realize that those cells are under new management, as I like to say. So typically women will feel some degree of improvement within the first month, but then couple months, 3 months, up to 4 months, that's when we really can make adjustments, figure out how she's responding, what other adjustments do we want to make. So that's a good time frame. And then 6 to 12 months is where we're really doing more fine tuning. And I want to make sure that she's getting the specific improvements that she's looking for, if it's sleep or metabolism or libido. So that's about the arc of the time frame. And then we figure out what the maintenance regimen will be.
Well, one thing I've noticed, there was like clinics for men where you get testosterone replacement. They don't look at treating the couple. So like if, let's say you have a couple and, they're married for many years and they're like 55 and, all of a sudden the man gets like testosterone replacement or the woman gets estrogen replacement. And now one of them is amorous and the other is like, where is this coming from? It's been years.
That's right.
Can it actually screw up a relationship or pressure it in a bad way if one person is treated but the other's not?
I think yes. We call that a libido mismatch. And that's not good. That is not what we're going for. So that's, and also I have a friend who's a coach and she uses the word ecology, like looking at the whole ecology. And I go there with my patients. When we get started, women fill in, and men also, but the women fill in a really detailed questionnaire. I really ask all these personal questions because that's very important, I don't want to create a libido mismatch. I don't want to create frustration, right? And so it's a balance between helping her feel better or him feel better, but not creating a problem that wasn't there prior in their relationship. That's super important, right? There's a whole time of life. There's a whole project that I'm launching called the Miracle of Menopause online community, because the time of going into menopause, we're in our late 40s, we're in our 50s on average. And this is for men also around this age. You talked about that kind of that timing in terms of our ages. We have a big opportunity to design and plan and look forward to the future. A lot of my women still have teenagers in the house, if they had children a little bit later like I did. But sometimes they're facing the empty nest transition. And so my goal is for people to feel good and have the mental clarity and the good mood and the good sleep to support what they want to do. But you're absolutely right. We don't want to create a problem that wasn't there.
Not just libido mismatch, but motivation. You said that also too.
That's right.
The hormone replacement helps, just general drive and zest for life.
That's right.
So again, if one has it, the other doesn't, I would think it would create fights and problems too. Oh, you never want to do anything. You're always tired. Come on, let's go do stuff. And that kind of thing.
Yeah. I would say it's a selection process. By the time people get to me, that you're absolutely correct. And by the time people arrive to my practice, they want to feel better. They realize that they used to go do fun things with their partner, and now they just cannot be, like you said, bothered to get up off the couch, and they don't like that, and they want to improve it. So again, for me, it always comes down to what are people's goals? What are individual patients' goals? What is it that we're wanting to work on and create together?
And how long people typically on HRT, what's the arc of it where they get to a stable point? Do they just continue forever? Do they lower the dosage at some point? Like, what does the whole treatment look like?
Yeah, beautiful. So that's probably everyone's number one question. So the first thing I like to say for that question is that using HRT to feel better does not commit anyone, woman or man. It does not commit them to use it forever. So that's really important, because I think a lot of, especially with the fear that's unfortunately surrounding HRT, a lot of women are afraid. They're like, oh no, I'm going to tough it out. I'm going to just suffer for several years because once I use hormones, I will always have to, and that's not true. So that's really important. I always like to emphasize it's not that women have to use HRT, but that they can use it, and it doesn't commit them to using it forever. Now, having said that, the benefits of hormone replenishment, which include more energy, better metabolism, the body functioning better, brain sharpness, better mood, better sexual response, lower incidence of breast cancer with the correct hormones being used. All of those benefits are while we're using the hormones. If a woman goes completely off, then she will start to lose those benefits. And she can use lower doses. So when I work with a woman, I have this conversation with her so that we're looking, don't rush to stop anything. All right. We can always lower the doses a while from now. And it also depends on her age. If she's in her 50s, a couple hundred years ago, only 5% of women reached age 50, whereas now a woman who reaches age 50 can expect to live another several decades. So her priorities are going to be very important and come into play. So the arc I really would encourage women to stay on at least a low dose. I personally, and I give these long answers to my patients, by the way, it's not like that easy of a question. For me personally, I will always be on at least a small dose of estrogen because of the benefit for bones. The consequences of a hip fracture are so devastating. The mortality is so high after hip fracture. It can be much, much higher even than lots of different cancers, definitely much higher than breast cancer. So that's important for people to keep in mind.
So what's missing from HRT? What's missing in the arsenal to treat, perimenopause and menopause? Anything?
Yes. From a pharmaceutical standpoint, in the United States, at this point in time, women do not have any options for testosterone. I love testosterone for women. It can be very helpful. It's also protective of the breasts. It helps with mood. I consider it a mood stabilizer. I think it's the main reason, men have 20 or more times as much testosterone as women do. And I really think that it's the reason that sometimes men look at us and are like, there's no actual problem here. So I really consider it a stabilizing hormone. Can help with libido. It's not the main driver for women, but it can help. So it has a lot of benefits, and we get it from compounding pharmacies, which, contrary to popular belief, are in fact well regulated. It's not the same system as all the other big pharmaceutical pharmacies that normally carry all the pharmaceutical medications, but they do have good regulation. They do a lot of internal testing for quality control. They want to provide good, safe, quality products for their patients. So that's what we have right now. We don't have any technically FDA approved options for women for testosterone in the US at this time. We used to have one. It was combined with an oral estrogen, so that's not good. And then other countries in the world have testosterone patches as an option. So hopefully we'll catch up soon. And in the meantime, I do work with the compounding pharmacies that I work with. I develop a relationship with them. I pay careful attention to the feedback my patients give me. So I usually work with compounding pharmacies that I've had a many, many years working relationship with, so that I know what they're doing for quality control. So that's, let's see. So those are the major ones. There's more. There are more. Other hormones in the body include DHEA, which made by the adrenals. That can help. It helps with libido. It helps with dryness. So women who have dry eyes, that's really common. And a lot of times the doctors will kind of throw their hands up and say, oh, just have to deal with it, So DHEA can be very helpful, as well as pregnenolone. And those are hormones that are available as over-the-counter supplements. So that's kind of interesting, right? Because, because a company, like a pharmaceutical company, cannot develop a patent on something that occurs in nature. So DHEA and pregnenolone I don't know the whole history of how that came to be, that those are available as over-the-counter. And people do that. They find out, they read about them, they read about those hormones, they buy the supplements online. And a lot of people come to me after spending a while trying to figure things out on their own. And then when they get to me, that's when we get organized, do the full baseline testing, interpret to optimal. All right. I have lots of, especially men get told a lot, your testosterone is quote unquote normal. Meanwhile,
but if you're at the bottom of the range of whatever parameter or the top, it's totally different.
That's exactly right. So that's really common, especially for the men. The range for women for estrogen in adult women is 2 to 45. So 3 is not a good level to have. You normally won't feel great with it that low. So exactly. That's exactly right. And that's really important for people to keep in mind.
Do women still have a cycle even if they have a hysterectomy or even if they're in menopause? Is it just a muted cycle, or there apparently seems to be no cycle?
Once a woman goes completely into menopause, or if her ovaries are removed, she is no longer having that, we can call it a menstrual cycle when she has her period, or we can also call it her ovarian cycle. That does go away. The ovaries do go into full retirement eventually.
So the hormones, whatever levels they're at, they don't tend to move up and down very much? Or do they still a little bit? Is there any variation in why? If so?
All right. So they decline, the levels decline. So for example, progesterone can decline in a woman as early as in her 30s. Progesterone calms the brain and helps with sleep. So if a woman's having sleep disruption, a lot of times she'll go to the doctor. The doctor say, well, you're having your period, so it's not your hormones. And they'll give her what I call a Band-Aid medication, like a sleeping pill or an antidepressant if she develops mood issues. So that's very important for women to keep in mind. So those changes are happening leading into perimenopause. And then in menopause, once those ovaries are completely in retirement, she's not going to have estrogen, progesterone. The adrenals will take over making some testosterone, but half of it came from her ovaries before she went all the way into menopause.
Okay. So is there anyone that doesn't need some kind of hormone therapy once they get to menopause, let's say, or some people are lucky somehow?
Yes, definitely some people are lucky in terms of how they feel. This is a really good question. And there are some doctors who have practices similar to mine with the bioidentical hormones. And I have not done this yet, but I am aware of some doctors out there who have women sign a consent form if they don't want hormones, because there are so many documented benefits to replenishing hormones. I haven't quite gotten there yet. The women who make it all the way to me, they're not feeling great and they want to feel better. So I have that select audience. Again, we live so long now. Half of us can expect to at least live into our 80s. And so we want to feel good. We want our brain sharp. I work mostly online, but I still see patients in person in the San Francisco Bay Area. My office is in Silicon Valley. And I have lots of women. They're still in the workforce. They want to be on top of their game. They want to feel good. And hormones are just really, really helpful with that. The anti-inflammatory, really beneficial. Estrogen lowers the risk of breast cancer, lowers the risk of colon cancer, very significantly lowers the risk of osteoporosis and hip fracture. So there's really a lot of benefits. And do we know all of the downside of not using HRT? No, I would say there's definitely some women who they do okay. If they are happy with how they feel, they're feeling good, then I think that's great.
One thing, so I took testosterone for a while. I still have a cream that I use. I noticed it wasn't just an increase in libido, but also mental clarity. I was able to think better. I felt, I don't know, like 20% smarter. Does the same thing happen for women? Besides feeling unmotivated, they feel more motivated, their libido's better. But what about intellectual capacity? Do they feel smarter when they have hormone replacement?
Yes, for sure. This is well documented. The brain fog is the phrase that a lot of women use. That's absolutely correct. And there are studies that look at this. It does settle down. So when a woman transitions into menopause, it can get pretty intense. And again, she's only 50, 51, 52. She's young in her professional life still. That's a really wonderful, productive time of her life and her career for a lot of women. And so it can be really disruptive, and it does settle down. But HRT helps it really go back to its best.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. So I don't know if telemedicine works in this area, but where can you help people that are listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with a lot of people online. I have a number of patients. I like to meet my patients in person at first, and then we do telemedicine from there on. But especially since the pandemic, I have expanded and really developed more of my processes to be able to do entirely online. And so my website is always the best way to find out about me. That's Dr. Liz MD, DrLizMD.com. People can write to me. They can ask me questions. They can speak to my team. I have an amazing, wonderful group of women who I work with, and they're just phenomenal. So we really are committed to a very high level of care and taking care of people. And like I said, men as well, but 10% of my practice. So 90%, vast majority are women, but the website's definitely easy place to find out about me and reach out to me if people would like to learn more.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and talking about this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Dr. Lyster, I forgot to ask you, you mentioned, I believe, offline about a free book offer for listeners of this podcast. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm delighted to offer as a gift the ebook of my most recent book. I have another one coming soon, but this book is Go for Great, Dr. Liz's Guide to Thrive at Every Age. GREAT, the word GREAT is actually an acronym for Gain Knowledge, Realize the Truth About Hormones, Explore Expectations, Advocate for Yourself. That's so important. And T is for Thrive. So I'm delighted to offer that as a gift to your listeners.
Okay. Oh, and then one last thing I forgot to ask you. I've interviewed thousands of people, literally like 4,000 plus. And whenever it comes to medical conditions, I hear that they get gaslighted by their doctors. And I would think, unfortunately, probably a lot of women get gaslighted about HRT. What do they do if the doctor's making them feel bad or saying, oh, you don't need that stuff or it's bad for you? Or what do they do?
Yeah, they look somewhere else. That's what they need to do. They need to advocate for themselves. I like to say that you got to be the tail that wags the dog. You got to know if you're not feeling good, do not tolerate it. I call it the J word, which is the word just, where the doctor says you're just getting older or you just have to accept it. That's not true. People who want to feel better can, and they need to keep looking till they get the answers that they need and want.
Excellent. Very good.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.